afraid your trust is blinding us. So drink your fill and just unwind in us. A warmly wicked frame of mind in us. You'll find in us. We want you and not our lot. We care for where you've been. And not a jot we care how you got in. We not care, not care, not care. Damn it, there you are.
I think I always wanted to tell stories, but I also always wanted to be a composer. And I tried to figure out a way that I could do both things for a living. And so it dawned on me that maybe if I told stories in song, that I would get to be both the writer I always wanted to be and also the composer I wanted to be. For a while, my stories took 3 minutes in length. And then one day, Joe Papp said, you know, what you're doing up there on stage is sort of a version of a musical. Have you ever thought about writing a musical? And I said, yes. And I said, I've had an idea for a long time of making a musical out of Charles Dickens' unfinished novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. And so I'm a storyteller by nature, but I try to use music as much as I can within the process of telling a story. When did I become Rupert Holmes? Well, I guess in high school, when I started writing songs, I thought, who's this guy that's doing all this? And so I kind of invented the name for myself and decided that from there on out, I would tell stories in song, and sometimes without music, or sometimes with music being the underscore. So I think pretty much I'm a storyteller who considers music to be in his bag of tricks. When I got into the music business, everyone took an adopted name. And I had always wanted to graft myself onto Sherlock Holmes's family tree, so the Holmes was easy. The first name was tough. My mother loved Rupert Brooke, and there was also a character, a cartoon character in England where I was born, named Rupert Bear. And I wanted to have a first name that no one else had, and I didn't know a single Rupert in the world. So suddenly Rupert Holmes came into existence, and I've been stuck with it ever since. My family started calling me Rupert from the moment I changed my name. And my mother once introduced me to a friend. She said, "This is my son David, Rupert Holmes." So it was part of inventing a persona for myself and an identity I could believe in, and also aligning myself with the British side of my family. I was born in England. I was born outside of Manchester, England. My dad was an American GI. My mother was a wonderful British girl that he married, and I was born there. And the first 3 years of my life, I must have, when I started speaking, I must have, for a while, had a British accent. And then I came to Levittown, Long Island, and that changed everything. I went to Manhattan School of Music, initially as a clarinet major. It was the one instrument my father could teach me to be good at, because he was a great clarinetist, and I was a pretty good clarinetist. Good enough to get into Manhattan, which is one of the 2 or 3 top schools in the country. The second I got in, I dropped clarinet, and I changed to theory and composition, because I wanted to compose, and I wanted to learn the building blocks of composing, but I didn't want to necessarily learn the philosophy of composing, because I was very interested in writing pop music, where everyone's opinion is as good as anybody else's. I was brought up pretty much as a classical musician, and there were a lot of rules about that. And I kind of rebelled against the fact that there were people who said, well, this is what good music is, and we know because we're smart. I liked the idea that people decided what good music was and what the music they wanted to hear was. And I thought that pop music was very democratic. I thought it was, you don't have to justify why you like a tune. You can just say, I like it, it's catchy, it says something to me, it speaks to me. So very early on, I mean, when I was in high school, I decided not to go for the long-haired music, even though I could play it, and go for the new long-haired music, which was what the Beatles were doing, where you just like the tune. I thought I want to write for people in the most democratic way I can. And I enjoyed slipping the burdens of classical music and instead writing what I felt. My father was a brilliant jazz musician who played lead alto in the big bands, and he was also a brilliant classical musician and conductor. He conducted Toscanini's string section for NBC Radio. and he was a music teacher. And I never knew a moment of my life that wasn't infused with music. And my father was an equal opportunity enjoyer of all kinds of music. So I grew up, by the time I was 5, I knew all of Duke Ellington's hits, but I also knew Ravel and Mozart. What an incredible upbringing. I thought the High-Lows were the best vocal group in the world, and then I heard the Beatles and decided, nope, the Beatles win. So I just can't imagine any part of my life where there wasn't music. And wonderfully, my brother was fanatical about opera, which I really didn't care that much for. But because he was always playing opera recordings all day long around the house, I was infused with Puccini and Verdi and Mozart, and it really came in handy when I needed some inspiration for the Mystery of Edwin Drood. My first album got heard by Barbra Streisand, and she called me up out of the blue and said, I love your songs, I want to record them, and I see you do all your own arrangements, so you should come out here to LA and arrange and conduct an album for me. And I'm also working on a movie called A Star Is Born, maybe you'd like to write some songs for that. That was off my first album. 5 albums later, it's 1979, and I need to fill out the album I'm doing with something up-tempo. I had a track I liked, but I didn't have a lyric that I liked. And the song went, people need other people, I believe you will find. And I said, no, I don't like that. So I wrote a new lyric to it. That's the law of the jungle. In the school of the street, you get out of the kitchen if you can't take the heat. I said, no, that sounds like Billy Joel. So I kept working and working on it. And finally, the night before I had to record the vocal for this song, I came up with a story idea. And I wrote a lyric that went, if you like Humphrey Bogart and getting caught in the rain. When I went to the studio that day to record the song, I was standing on the mic, I was just about to record the vocal, and I thought, Humphrey Bogart, you know, I've done so many movie references in my 5 albums, and this couple, it doesn't have the kind of sense of excitement and adventure that I want to infuse into the song. Humphrey Bogart's the wrong word. It should be, if you like, it's like they want to escape. So when you go on vacation the first day you're on the beach, you never order a Budweiser. You want a drink in a hollowed out pineapple with flags of all nations, and if it can be blue, that's even better, right, the drink? And I thought, well, what are the escape drinks? And I thought daiquiri, Mai Tai, pina colada. Pina colada. Never had a pina colada. Didn't even know if I was saying it right. I didn't know if it was pina or pina, but I said pina. And they rolled the tape, and I recorded the vocal. And the first time, the vocal you hear on that record is the very first time I ever sang that song out loud. And as I was going, I kept looking ahead at the lyric on a music stand and saying, oh, I got to squeeze these words together. And so I came up with things like, I've got to meet you by tomorrow noon, to get those in. Or I am into champagne, to fill out the space. And I think that the freshness of that, the fact that it was the first time I'd ever tried to sing the song, comes through on the record. And for what I may lack in vocal skills, I made up for with enthusiasm and energy. The song was called Escape, and the label said to me, we're getting incredible response to this record, but everyone's asking for the song about the pina coladas, the very last words that were written for that song. They said, would you mind if we called it Escape, parenthesis, the pina colada song? I said, compromise my artistic integrity? They said, well, it's not going to sell otherwise. I said, well, I guess then it's the pina colada song, and it became the pina colada song, and went to #1. It was the last #1 record of the 70s. It was the first #1 record of the 80s. Therefore, I can tell you, I was at the top of the charts for 2 decades without interruption. I feel kind of amazed and flattered and stunned by how many movies have used Escape the Pina Colada song as part of their score. It's a very long list. Most recently, Deadpool 2, before that Guardians of the Galaxy. When you get off the Guardians of the Galaxy ride in Disneyland, you can hear Escape. I think it's been used because it's iconic of a time and a certain kind of silly exuberance. Sometimes it's used for comic purposes. Angelina Jolie picked it to use in her movie Wanted because she blew away like 20 bad guys and then played the Pina Colada song on her car radio, and she said that seemed the perfect fit. You know, just blow up the world and then listen to the Pina Colada song. And it's not only used in movies, it's used on TV all the time. There was an episode of Las Vegas where someone is signaling to a blackjack player by playing the Pina Colada song in the coffee shop. And they get the guy, they interrogate him, and they say, why were you playing the Pina Colada song? He says, hey, the Pina Colada song is my favorite song in the world. And I'm sitting at home and I think that's the kind of TV we need much more of. Sure glad to get that off my chest. Most of my life, I was very interested in Charles Dickens' unfinished novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. The idea that it was a mystery that had no ending fascinated me, and the idea that it had no ending because he died exactly halfway through writing it. Something he hoped would be one of his greatest works, and he never finished it. I was just haunted by that all my life. And I meant to reread it as an adult, and I was taking a train from Los Angeles to New York. I used to love to travel by train. And the thing about the train is that there's absolutely nothing to do. So usually at a bookstore, I would pick up a couple of books that I'd always meant to read thoroughly. And in this case, I picked up a copy of The Mystery of Edwin Drood, read it, and by the time I got to Chicago, I was done. And two things had occurred to me. One is, how was it meant to end? And second was, you know, this would make an interesting musical because its protagonist is a crazed choir master. He's madly in love with his music student. There's a character named Durdles who sings silly songs. He himself hears the music of the spheres when he's on his, in his opium-induced fantasies. I thought this could be a musical and I could write it. But how would I end it? I held on to that idea. I made a couple of starts at trying to write it, but it seemed very dark, so gloomy, and so murky. And then one day I was performing. I was headlining at Dangerfield's Comedy Club. I was headlining at Dangerfield's Comedy Club and doing a lot of narrative in between the songs to lead into songs. And Joe Papp was in the audience, the producer of A Chorus Line, and he said, you know, what you're doing up there is theater. Have you ever thought about writing a musical? And I said, well, yes, I have. And I met with him and I decided to do a kind of term paper on The Mystery of Edwin Drood to make my own argument as to why it would be a good musical and how you would go about doing it. And my thought was, working in theater for the very first time, that the very height of theatricality would be not for me to presume to be Charles Dickens and write the ending he didn't, but rather to make use of the fact that the audience is there live. Unlike TV, unlike film, the audience knows it's there and the actors know they're there. Why doesn't the audience vote on what at each performance they think should happen to the protagonists? And then I got to the last page of this term paper I was writing for myself, and I typed two words at the top of the page. I typed Victorian vaudeville, because I realized that instead of writing a musical of Edwin Drood, I might write a musical about a Victorian music hall company, a bunch of shameless hams who are used to doing comedy and pratfalls and have favorite songs that involve the audience singing along, and have them put on The Mystery of Edwin Drood. That would free me from trying to write something dark and musty, and instead make it lively and theatrical. And it all fell in place that day. And then I thought, wait, in Victorian times, women sometimes dressed up as boys in things like Aladdin or Ali Baba or Puss in Boots. The lead would be played by a character called Principal Boy, which is a woman. And I thought Edwin Drood could be played by a woman. And that would mean that if Edwin Drood sings a love song with Rosebud, her fiancé, it would be a love duet for two sopranos. I don't know that anyone's ever written a love duet for two sopranos. And all these ideas came to me all in that one afternoon. I took it to Joe Papp. He encouraged me to write it. I did. I performed the entire musical for him in his office one day. I had pre-recorded all the accompaniments, and I played every role. I let him vote. He was the first person ever to vote on the ending, Joe Papp. And at the end of my performance of this musical, he said, well, look, here's the story. Every year we do Shakespeare in the park. So this year, you're going to be Shakespeare. And if it goes well, we'll take it to Broadway. I walked out of there in a daze. I thought, how has this miraculous thing happened to my life? And I think I've been in a bit of a daze ever since. The actual literary mystery of the Mystery of Edwin Drood is fascinating. Mark Twain commented on it, because the book was published during Mark Twain's lifetime. And he talked about people who researched and speculated on what the ending of the novel would have been. And Mark Twain said a great number of researchers have already thrown considerable darkness on the subject, and if they continue their work, we shall soon know nothing about it at all. The more you investigate, the more mysterious some of the mysteries become. But the truth of the matter is that I think that if Charles Dickens had finished The Mystery of Edwin Drood, then 10 years later, Robert Louis Stevenson would not have bothered to write Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think that's where he was going with it. I think the simple answer is that John Jasper is the murderer and doesn't even know some of the time that he's the murderer. They didn't have words like split personality or schizophrenic in those days, in Victorian times, but that's, I think, what the mystery was. However, I'm pleased to say that throughout the many years that the Mystery of Edwin Drood has been solved by audiences each night, they rarely come up with that as the ending. They always want something a little more intriguing. People sometimes ask me, how many endings did you write for the Mystery of Edwin Drood? What are there, 7 murderers, 8 murderers, 9 murderers? And I said, well, the actual answer is that someone did the math, and there are over 490 different possible combinations of endings, including some I've still not seen to this day. And the audience, when they go to see the Bergen County Players production, and the actors, when they go to work to perform the show at Bergen County Players, neither of them know at any performance who is going to have the moment in the spotlight, who will be the star of that show, who will be the 2 lovers who find happiness together, who will be the mysterious detective in disguise. It's not just that the audience doesn't know until the audience decides. The actors don't know either. And if that doesn't keep you on your toes as a performer, I don't know what would. You know, prior to the revival of The Mystery of Edwin Drood on Broadway by the Roundabout, I had worked with its director, Scott Ellis, on the musical Curtains with David Hyde Pierce. I wrote that with Kander Nebb, the incomparable songwriting duo. And the show was a Valentine to musical theater. And going into doing the revival with Scott, I realized that I had learned a little something about comedy writing in the 20 years that it had ensued, and writing my own TV series, Remember When. And I thought, instead of it being my first outing, I was now a little bit more experienced at getting laughs without the actors having to work as hard as they often did. So, and Scott works at an adrenaline pace. Things are fast. His biggest stage direction is this: move it, keep it moving, keep it moving. Knowing he's that kind of personality and that kind of director, and knowing that I knew a little bit more about comedy, it was fun to go at the script of The Mystery of Edwin Drood again and find any moment where I had an opportunity for a laugh that I had never gone for in the initial version. Consequently, the Roundabout revival was, I think, faster and funnier than the original. I love both versions. But I did want to make available to Bergen County Players everything that I had done that I considered to be an improvement in the Roundabout revival. And so your wonderful director has had available to him that script. No one else in America has had a chance at that script. And Bergen County Players are going to be presenting a version that no one has quite seen on the stage. It's neither fully the Roundabout revival and neither the original. It's sort of a hybrid of both. And I think it will be an intensely funny and entertaining outing. My relationship with the Bergen County Players is one of the most meaningful things in my entire career. And it goes back a long time. It goes back to my college days. It goes back to the 60s, taking the number 11 bus from Nanuet, where I lived, very close to the borderline of New Jersey, to Manhattan School of Music every day. And looking out my window And while I wondered how I would ever get into the music business, I would look and see this wonderful theater, this beautiful rustic theater with some show outside. I think the first time I paid attention, it was South Pacific. And wondering if maybe someday if I went there with a song I had written, maybe someone at the door would be willing to let me sit down and play something for them. Maybe they might have a review that they would put together, and maybe I could write something for that. It became sort of my idea of a door that I might take that might let me into entertainment, into the entertainment business, into creating musical theater. Imagine my thrill when many years later, after The Mystery of Edwin Drood had won all the Tony Awards and my thriller Accomplice had won the Edgar Award from the Mystery Writers of America, that I learned that that theater was going to put on my play Accomplice. I went to see it. It was fantastic. And I said to Larry Lantzman, impulsively, this was so good, I'll write you a thriller. I'll write you one. And it was a sincere offer. And then Larry kept pressing me. And eventually I thought, you know, it'll be easier to write the thriller than to explain to him one more year why I just don't have the time to do it right now. I wrote Thumbs, and we got to bring up a show together, Larry and I, at the Bergen County Players. And again, I was stunned. I was stunned most of all by the casting call, because the talent was abundant. I turned to Larry, I said, you know, this is tough. I'm having to choose between 3 great candidates. I feel like I'm at a New York City casting call. The play was a thrill to do. It was funny. The audience loved it. The performances were brilliant. And then imagine my honor when years later they do the first musical of mine that they've ever done, Curtains, written with Kander and Ebb. And I go to see it yet again. It's a fantastic production. And I'm blown away. And in the ensuing years, by the way, I actually go to see plays that I didn't write at Bergen County Players, and they're always terrific. And finally now, it feels like I've come full circle, because now Bergen County Players are doing the first musical I ever wrote. The Tony Award-winning show has come home to the county where I wrote it, because I lived in Tenafly when I wrote The Mystery of Edwin Drood, just down the road. And now it's back in Bergen County being performed, and I know it will be brilliantly performed, by this theater company that resides so close to my heart, and which I always thought would be my doorway into musical theater.